Welcome back. In this lesson, we'll be talking about something practical, which is converting one data type into another data type. Imagine you have a recipe that requires 2 cubic meters of flour for a baking purpose, but your measuring cup is graduated in milliliters. You need to convert between these measurements to follow the recipe correctly, right? That's a bit like what we'll be doing with numbers and strings in Python. Just like converting measurements in cooking, in Python, we sometimes need to convert data from one data type to another. This is called type conversion or typecasting. We've already learned about different data types like strings, which is basically text. We have booleans, which is true or false. We have integers, which are whole numbers. And we have floats, which are decimals. Sometimes we need to convert between these data types to make our programs work correctly. Python provides functions like string, int, float, and bool for converting data types. Let's look at them one by one. The first one we'll consider is the string function, str. It is used to convert other data types to strings. Alright, let's say we have an example where we want to perform string concatenation. Let's say we have a variable with the name of number of pets. Okay? So, and let's say our number of pets is 2. Alright, and we want to form a statement. Out of that, we can say I have, alright. Okay, so we have plus for string concatenation. We have number of pets, then we have plus, okay, plus, then we have another string. So we have pets. So this statement now is supposed to be I have 2 pets. But if you run this now, we are going to run into error because we cannot concatenate integer with string. This is where type conversion comes in. Now, we can use the string function to convert this number into a string. Okay, so to do that, we are going to wrap this in a parenthesis and where we have the str function. The str function is used to convert other data types to strings. So now, the result of this str is going to be 2 in string form, not in an integer form. So if we run this now, so we have I have 2 pets. So you can as well add space after this and before this so that we have space. So you can see we have I have 2 pets. This string function now converts the integer to string data type. The next type conversion we'll be looking at is conversion of other data type to integer using the int function. For example, let's say we have a variable with the name of age and we have age to be a string of 25. Okay. Now let's say we want to print, let's say we have age multiplied by 3. If you run this now, what is going to be our answer? Okay. We are supposed to have 75, right? But what we have now is 25, 25, 25. This is because 25 as at now is a string. And using multiplication symbol with a string is going to perform string repetition. Whereas this is supposed to perform a mathematical operation of multiplying 25 by 3. So to convert this string now to integer, we use the int function, int. So we have int. Alright, and then we are going to put this in a parenthesis. So at the end of age, we have another parenthesis. So if we run this now we have 75 because this int function has converted the 25 from string to an integer. And integer of 25 multiplied by 3 is now 75. We also have the float function, which converts other data type to a floating data type. Alright. So let's say we have a variable of, let's say, temperature. Okay. Temperature is equal to, let's say temperature is equal to a string of, let's say 24.5. Okay. Now let's say we want to print temperature plus 10. As we already know, this is not possible. We can now add a string to an integer. So we're going to convert this into a float. So we wrap this in a parenthesis and then we have floats in front of it here. So that float is going to convert this string to a floating point number, right? So we are going to have 34.5. So we have 34.5 as a floating point number here plus 10. That's going to be 34.5. We also have the bool function to convert other data types to boolean. For example, let's get rid of this. We have, let's print, okay. So let's say we have bool. Bool is the function that converts other data types to boolean. So if we have, let's start with an empty string. We run this now, what we are going to have is false. The bool function converts other data types to boolean. So now we have an empty string. You know that boolean can either be true or false. So empty string evaluates to false in Python. Okay, so let's have another example. Let's say let's say we have bool. Okay, now let's convert hello to boolean. What do we have? We're going to have true, because hello contains certain text, so that is going to evaluate to true. An empty string is going to evaluate to false. If you have space, this is an empty string, but space is a character. If you run that again, you're going to have true. Space is a character in itself. So an empty string is what is going to evaluate to false. All right. Let's also convert 0 to boolean and see what we have. So we are converting 0 to boolean now. What do we have? That is going to evaluate to false. 0 also evaluates to false. Empty string evaluates to false, but a string evaluates to true provided that it's not an empty string. Other numbers also evaluates to true. Let's print, we have boolean. Okay, let's pass a number. Let's say we have 1. Okay, 1 is also going to evaluate to true, as you can see the last print statement here. Even negative numbers, they also evaluate to true. Okay, so we have bool, the function that converts to boolean. We have bool. So let's say we have -1. That's also going to evaluate to true. So far we have empty string to evaluate to false, and we have 0 to evaluate to false. There are other types of data that evaluate to false. We will get to them in later lessons. Now let's look at some common mistakes to avoid when doing type conversion. One of the mistakes is trying to convert an invalid digit strings to numbers. You know, normally we use ints to convert string, either int or float, to convert string to numbers. Let's say we have 20 in strings. This is going to convert this to numbers, to integer. Now, if we are trying to convert an invalid digit string, let's say we write 20 in letters, this is going to run into error, because 20 is an invalid literal for the int function. You cannot convert this to an integer. All right, so you ensure that whatever you want to convert is a valid literal for the integer function. One way to check if the conversion is going to make sense before doing it is to use the isDigit method. This digit method is a string method that you can use to check if a string is a valid digit that can be converted to an integer or float. For example, let's say we have print, let's say we have a string of 20. So if you use .isDigit, isDigit is going to check if the string is a valid digit that can be converted to either an integer or float. If you run this now, isDigit is going to return true if it is valid. But for example, if it is false, if it is not valid digit literal, then okay, 20 is going to be like this. So if you run this now, it's going to return false. So before using your conversion function, you can as well perform this check to check if what you are dealing with is convertible. Another common mistake is to avoid trying to convert a string that contains a decimal point to an integer. For example, let's say we have the int function, okay? And then you want to convert a string that has a decimal point to an integer. If you run this now, you are going to run into error, because this can only be converted to a float, not an integer. You should always perform these checks. Now, before we wrap up this lesson, there is a function that you can use to check the data type of any data you are dealing with in case you do not know the kind of data you are dealing with beforehand. For instance, maybe you are fetching data from a database and you are not sure of the kind of data you'll be getting. That function is the type function. So, for example, let's pass a string. Okay, let's pass, I'll say John. So normally John is a string. So if you print this now, let's put this in a print function. So if you print this now, you are going to have string. You see you have str standing for string. If what you pass into the type function is a number, let's say 20, this is going to return int, which is because 20 is an integer. If you have 20.5, that is going to return float, right? So if you have false or true, that is going to return boolean. You see bool is standing for boolean. So you use the type function to check the type of data you are dealing with. You should remember that type conversion is like translation between different kinds of data. So in this lesson, we've learned how to convert strings to number, how to convert other data type to boolean and to float and all that. In our next lesson, we'll see how to get input from users and how to use these conversion techniques with user input. I will see you in the next lesson.